Absolute solitude can be a dangerous thing. The world away from the world holds a still, silent warmth. The promise of a life without distraction or destruction. For some people, the silent embrace of solitude is a siren song that becomes harder and harder to resist the longer they spend alone, until they give into it entirely, vanishing into the cracks of the world where such solitude can still be found. For me, that siren song led me to take a 12-month job stationed at a small, lonely cottage in Tasmania, miles and miles from the nearest collection of buildings that would be big enough to be called civilization. Ever since childhood, I've always tended towards spending time alone, preferring the company of nature and a good book to the constant drone of humanity. People say I'm an introvert, but I don't agree. I just value peace in a world where peace is hard to come by. That feeling was magnified hundreds of times when I decided to leave my partner of 3 years, a career-driven woman who had become more and more distant, while at the same time turning to emotional manipulation to try and keep me from noticing. I needed a break from it all, and I felt I would find my peace on that isolated, rugged headland jutting out into the Southern Ocean. The cottage was a tiny, utilitarian thing, perched high on a headland in the southwest conservation area, the only access being ancient trapping trails and the odd service road. It looked out over the savagery of the Southern Ocean as it smashed into the cliffs far below. A cozy retreat in the teeth of some of the wildest weather on planet Earth. My job was to monitor the seabirds that wheeled overhead and, in some cases, nested in the windswept dunes down along the bay. 12 months spent walking the beach and bird watching sounded like heaven at the time. The pay was very reasonable, and I had a 4-wheel drive, so I could make the trek north to Strathgordon or Strahan if I happened to crave some more modern comforts. As long as the data was good, no one cared what I did, and I kind of liked that. I quickly settled into a rhythm. A monthly trip for food, supplemented by fresh fish when I felt like fishing. Walks to the various seabird colony sites spread over the week, and lots of time enjoying the wild beauty of the place, or basking in front of the fire alone with my thoughts. It was energizing, and all of my problems quickly felt like they were worlds away. I read and I wrote, and even took up painting, exploring myself in the moments between exploring the spectacular land around me. On my 4th or 5th monthly trip into Strahan for supplies, I was having a meal and a glass of wine in the pub when I struck up a conversation with a good-looking young girl. We hit it off nicely, and although I was happy with my isolation, it was nice to have a proper conversation and connect with someone. We talked for a couple of hours, and I was surprised when she expressed concern about what I did for a living. "You should be careful, all the way out there," she said. "It's a different world. Things happen that have no explanation. People go missing and turn up places they couldn't reasonably be. It's really not the kind of place to be if you're unprepared." We talked about the southwest forests, then about strange lights and strange creatures and strange disappearances. In many ways, I think it fired off my imagination even more, made me keener to explore the amazing place that I'd found myself in. We spent the night in my room, and in the morning I promised to keep in touch with her. and she promised to tell me more about the wilderness that surrounded my tiny little home. Over the winter, I spent more time inside as the wind howled and the temperature plummeted. My new pen pal and I emailed each other once or twice a week, and I would see her when I would stay in town. But I still relished my seclusion, and I spent most of my time with myself. I had hoped to explore some of the mysterious phenomenon that my new friend had told me about, but all I had managed were a few sightings of strange lights flitting through the thick forest canopy. Spring came around, and I decided the lull in the weather was a great opportunity to catch a few fish. Winter was a thrilling experience, but the weather prevented me from fishing, and my food options were quite dull. A few fresh salmon grilled over the fire sounded incredible, especially after months of frozen meat and carbs. I jumped at the chance to throw out a line after checking the seabirds down by the bay. It must have been about mid-afternoon when I noticed her watching me. I had ventured down the low end of the bay, where dunes gave way to the forest, and I had landed a few small fish already. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran through my bones. Tucked almost entirely behind a big tree, watching me from the shadows it cast, I saw a girl. She ducked out of sight when I first saw her, but I kept watching the tree and waiting for her to show herself again. From her appearance, she was clearly indigenous and quite young, in her late teens at a guess. The poor thing almost looked wild, and I wondered what she was doing all the way out here. I offered a wave, and she cocked her head, quizzical, before dashing back into the forest. It was a strange encounter, but I thought surprisingly little of it. My friend in Strahan had told me about communities of illegal trappers and hermits that lived way out here, and I knew that Tasmania was home to all sorts of loners and wilderness lovers who spend most of their time completely hidden away. I suppose that formed part of the attraction for an exhausted Sydney bloke like me, and I just assumed that the young girl must have been part of a community or something like that. She had seemed genuinely afraid of me, so I left a couple of fish where she had stood before I left and headed back to the cottage. When I woke the next day, I found a leaf-wrapped parcel on the doorstep. Inside were bunches of herbs and scraps of bark, items which I'd learned had medicinal properties over the course of my cottage reading. I smiled at that, thinking that the girl had at least appreciated my olive branch and accepted that I wasn't scary. Over a few weeks, I went back to her tree. I never saw her, but I left small things for her. Old books, food and the like. Sometimes I'd get something in return. Often I didn't, but that wasn't the point for me. I was just happy to share. Especially because she might well have needed more than I did. 3 months later, in late spring, I was returning home from another Strahan trip with food and supplies. I had come to call them my Strahan trysts in my head. A little inside joke for one, because I would usually meet up with my mystery-loving pen pal. In a strange way, my visits both to and from the town, and with her, made me feel like I was cheating on Solitude, the lover at home. Maybe the Solitude had turned into something less desirable. I don't know. Whatever the case, that trip back home changed everything. Maybe half an hour from the cottage, deep onto a tiny service road so thickly forested it felt like an eternal twilight, a man dashed out of the forest. I stepped hard on the brake, startled but not entirely surprised, given my earlier encounter with the young Indigenous girl. I had come to believe that there must be some kind of small enclave out here, and the man appeared seemingly to belong to that. He looked older, disheveled, clearly a man who lived rough. I slowed down, both to avoid him and to offer assistance, before the look in his eyes gave me pause. He was wild, terrified, his eyes darting this way and that before catching sight of the car. For a moment, I thought he might run at me to try and get in, but he didn't. Instead, he cast a hesitant glance at the forest behind him before looking back towards me. He screamed something at me. Might have been, "Run, get out," or "Run, they're coming," before vanishing into the thick bush on the other side. I waited a few moments, quite rattled and, honestly, concerned for the man, who appeared increasingly in need of psychological help as the minutes ticked by, and no one followed him. Of course, they could have seen my car and been waiting for me to go, or waiting for me to get out. I decided that getting to the cottage was the safest course of action. In all likelihood, the poor guy probably had some kind of problem, living out here to get away from it all. I called it in over the radio, and that was about all I could do. In such vast wilderness, no one would go looking for a man who probably didn't want to be found. That night, I lay in bed when I noticed bright flashes of light coming through the curtains, like lightning ripping through the sky. Strangely enough, though, no thunder followed, which did strike me as odd enough to drag me out of my half-asleep state to look. What I saw was definitely not lightning. Over the forest, hundreds of lights danced in the mesmerizing patterns across the sky. They were white and red and blue and yellow. They flew high above the trees and dipped right down, weaving in behind them like sentient smoke. I stumbled out to the grass, awed by the dazzling and completely unexplained display. It must have only been a few moments before I heard the screaming. Puzzled, I did something quite foolish, taking several steps towards the sound. My singlet and cotton underwear, I realized, were completely useless against a sudden chill that seemed to hang in the heavy air. It had been a warm evening, and sudden temperature change is basically the norm in that part of the world. But this felt different. Not a breath of wind disturbed the trees as those lights darted through them, and the ground still retained the warmth of the day. In the forest, more screams. Agonized, despairing. and I noticed the distinct sound of drums beating in the still night. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to run back into the cottage, maybe radio for help, and screamed in shock. Between me and the door stood a man, tall and menacing, in the garb of an indigenous warrior. His skin was daubed with body paint, and he held a long spear ready at his side. His expression was one of stern hatred. How had he gotten here? I hadn't heard so much as a footstep. I raised my hands, half in peace and half in plea, and I took 2 steps backwards, stammering out some useless words. The man seemingly took no notice, just fixing me with that hateful stare. Something gave out inside me, and I turned to run, hoping to maybe lose myself down in the seabird colony or the rocks by the bay. I was confronted by an even more terrifying sight. As I had turned my back to the forest, it seems that 100 warriors had made their way out of the shadows. They were the source of the drums, and I realized that they were also the source of the lights. More of the brilliant orbs came down to earth, and as they did, became a proud warrior, joining the ranks of his brothers. They all fixed me with that same glare, stern, hateful, and unmoving. In amongst them, I noticed other people, some unmoving, some screaming desperately. All of them were strung up on long poles, hefted by 2 warriors, bloodied and beaten. As more and more warriors materialized, the men holding one of the suspended forms stepped forward and calmly tossed their captive over the cliff. He screamed the whole way down. Those same warriors turned and fixed their gaze on me. Without a sound, the warrior behind me had moved close, and he grabbed me as I turned to run, strong as a vice. I screamed and began to cry, overwhelmed with terror at the fate that clearly awaited me. And then suddenly, a breath of wind, and the drums fell silent. No. A voice carrying through the wind. The warriors who had just thrown the men over the cliff halted their advance, looking unsure. The voice spoke again. No. This one kind. This one grateful. This one respect the land and respect the spirits. I realized, somehow, that the voice was not speaking English. Yet, in my head, I could understand what was being said. Overhead, a brilliant red orb, by far the largest I'd ever seen, began to descend. When it touched the ground, that girl from the beach was standing in its place. Do not harm this one. Let him go. At her command, the warrior holding my arms immediately released me, and I fell to the ground, sobbing and desperate. The girl smiled and appeared before me, seeming to cross the distance instantly. We are sorry. Do not mean to harm you. Do not mean to scare you. kind to me. She flicked her head to the people still hanging on the poles. These ones, not kind, not respect. Poison land, kill and spoil. These ones punish. Suddenly, I had a flurry of images flash through my mind. Images of rare animals dying over days in agonizing snares. Images of men beating and doing awful things to indigenous women. Images of ancient, sacred sites polluted by laughing drunks. Don't look, said the voice. A few of them still screamed on their way down the cliffs. But when I opened my eyes, all but the girl were gone. She looked sad, as though she regretted what had just happened. My people, all gone, and still they come, still they destroy. Still, she spoke in her language, but some kind of power I did not and do not understand allowed my mind to process what she was saying. People can come. It is okay. But people should have respect. People should be grateful. You, always safe here. You give gift. You show kindness. Even though nobody asked. She stood and smiled, her eyes still swimming with an ancient sadness. Spirits keep land safe. Make sure people respect land. Do not fear. It is just the way. With that, she became light, brilliant and red, and moved off through the forest. I must have been in shock, because I lay there on the grass until the sun came up. When it did, though, I was struck by how peaceful it still felt. It seemed as though the night before had been a bad dream, although the hand-shaped bruises on my upper arms assured me that it had not been. The warmth of the rising sun on my face reminded me of the girl and her protection. And for some reason, the best thing I could think of to do was to go about my day normally. Surprisingly, I still saw out my contract. I moved to Strahan, where I run eco-tours into the great wilderness. It's just the right amount of solitude, I think. A little small town company, and a lot of peace. I witnessed something horrific that night at the cottage, but I think understanding it made it less terrifying. This is a land of ancient spirits, and that night, the spirits of the land extracted vengeance on those who had wronged them. Illegal trappers, criminals fleeing justice, and ignorant, callous people with no respect for the beauty of this place. So, I'll leave you with a word of warning, as I do my clients. Go out there into the bush. Enjoy it. Do not be afraid. Just so long as you remember to pay your respects.